And here we are. Here we are, reduced to 2 for now.
Nope, no
Um,
Rob tonight.
as far as we know, Rob has lost power. There's storms rolling through Ohio. We had storms yesterday. There's storms in parts of it today. So he doesn't have any power. But if they manage to get his power on, I guess he's projected they're supposed to come out like sometime after 11. But if they're able to get his power on sooner, he may pop in here. Otherwise, it's just going to be the two of us.
Where they're trying to keep us down.
They don't want us to have that harp episode that we want to
Yep.
do eventually. Um, we're gonna get there eventually.
And the undulating clouds. That one was pretty interesting.
I'm still at the very tail end of the cold that I've had because the cough and the throat stuff I get is always the thing that lingers the most. So I'm gonna try to talk through as much of this as I can because this is a super
Right.
interesting topic.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorites, actually.
I was watching a little video about it a minute ago. Just briefly, I think it's from my understanding so far, it's kind of like an extinction, and the
Yeah, extinction
Permian
of event.
period was very interesting. Like no one ever talks about that one.
We've I was trying to go through to find out, but we name our episodes weird things sometimes, as like this one. That's mostly me. That's my fault because I have a flair for the dramatic for titles. But
I like it. Comet of
we
Doom. Got a
we
nice ring
talked
to it.
about either I think it was last year. I think we talked about because I had watched a series on Netflix that's probably still up there if you folks want to see or not. I don't know. The streaming services come and go with what they have up there. Um, it was a series of episodes of a show um, called Ancient Something by Graham Hancock. Let me take a look. And Graham Hancock is kind of a divisive figure. He's labeled a pseudo archaeologist because of his various theories and
Hold
beliefs.
on. Give me a second. I think I might have found that same video. I'll share it in
Ancient
chat real quick.
Apocalypse. And that came out in 2022. But it's something we've talked about a couple times because we've also talked about the connection with Antarctica and a few other things. Like we just had the Antarctica episode a few episodes ago. Like I said, pardon me. I'm gonna try to get through this without coughing too much. But just to do some background while he's looking and before we get into the new stuff
Okay, I got it.
we got.
So I
There we
just
go.
shared a video in chat, and I believe that is the one that I was watching right before we started the episode. And they
Video.
mentioned his name in the show notes. They mentioned that name, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Graham Hancock is he's labeled a pseudo archaeologist. He's a writer who he's got 3 books out as of 2015. He has the series Ancient Apocalypse on TV, and he speculated that an advanced Ice Age civilization was destroyed in a cataclysm, but that the survivors passed on their knowledge to hunter gatherers, giving rise to the earliest known civilizations of ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Mesoamerica. Now, there's various bits of evidence from one side or the other. He says that this happened during a period called the Younger Dryas, which is it's in our geologic history that occurred between 12,900 to 11,700 years BC. And it's known for the sudden or abrupt cooling of the northern hemisphere. It's the last great ice age that we had. There was a sudden cooling effect after we'd been warming up, and this was relatively brief. It was an actual brief ice age. It wasn't like as lengthy as some of the other ones because there was some event that caused it the temperature to reverse the trend of it had been going up at the time.
And he was talking about the woolly mammoths as well.
Yep. Yeah, he said there's a lot of evidence that he's supposedly come up with. I watched the series and I liked it. I
Yeah.
enjoyed it. Um, And there is a lot of evidence for and against his theories, so it's not a definite. But there was an article recently that came out, and I shared it in our group chat, and I want to talk about it here because it kind of reignited the topic, and I think it adds a little bit of evidence to his theory. Um, the article was on populararchaeology.com, and it was titled "Carvings at Ancient Monument May Be World's Oldest Calendar," which is interesting because anytime they find a new benchmark for what the oldest something or other innovation or different expansion or whatnot in history, then it gets big news. But I don't think a lot of people heard about this. I don't think it got to be super huge news. They were at Göbekli Tepe, which people have been to before. It's in Turkey. It's an ancient temple complex, and they've been studying things there for quite a long time. It's not new that they've been there. And this article was written up at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And right, Scotland.
Edinburgh,
Yeah.
Scotland, yes.
For some reason, I always think sometimes it's Ireland, but it's not Scotland. And markings on a stone pillar. This is from the article at a 12,000-year-old archaeological site, which puts it within the range of the onset of the Younger Dryas. Likely represent the world's oldest solar calendar, created as a memorial to a devastating comet strike, experts suggest.
And you can relate that back to his video as well, I believe, because he was
Mhm.
talking about how he thinks a lot of these stone monuments, like Stonehenge, for example, might have been used as a way to measure something in the solar aspect.
Mhm. His specific theory states that he believes a comet was the reason that the event happened, and that it was the effects of this comet that wiped out a previous civilization. And there have been people who have disagreed that, oh, it's not this, it can't be a meteor, it can't be a comet, it's just something that happened. But I think this is pretty clear, because if an ancient civilization put it there, that's pretty definitive. It says that the research suggests ancient people were able to record their observations of the sun, moon, and constellations in the form of a solar calendar. And in really weird coincidence, this solar calendar has 365 days, consisting of 12 lunar months plus 11 extra days. So that's pretty advanced for being
Yeah.
pre-Sumerian. Because we assume that that they didn't figure out the 365 days plus leap year and all that other kind of stuff for a while after that. At least not until um, Mesopotamia and the rise of the Sumerian empires after the ice ages were over. So it's super interesting, and it got me back on the topic. According to this, the carvings at Göbekli Tepe um, were made between were made around 13,000 years ago, or 10,850 BC. So it's right around that time frame. And I think there's
Yeah.
just a few bits of evidence missing to tie all these things together and tighten up that timeline. Stephen, since we haven't talked to you about this on the show before, I know me and Rob have talked about it a
Yeah.
couple times past episodes. What's your take on this? What do you think about all that?
So one of the parts I wanted to mention that I thought was pretty interesting to me personally was he said that the meteor impact theoretically would have been 150 miles.
Mm,
And that sounds pretty large. And I'm also wondering, like, what kind of other, like, particular effects would it have had on the environment and the animals and all that? And I wanted, if you know anything else about it, I would like to dig further into the Permiad period, I believe it was called, because I've never even heard of that one until I watched this video, and they didn't really get into it. They just kind of briefly mentioned it, but it's in the chart. It said that 95% of the entire population of everything on the planet got wiped out to extinction. And in comparison, the Triassic period, I believe it was called, with the dinosaurs,
Mm.
it only got 75% wiped out. So, like, why does nobody talk about this other period of time? I'd like to, know more about that as well.
It's one of the great mass extinctions, because one of the things that we've noticed throughout history is every certain span of time we have periods of mass extinction. Sometimes they're huge amounts, sometimes they're moderate amounts, but they're all pretty devastating. Um, I'm trying to find an article.
And another thing that stood out to me was, like we mentioned about the woolly mammoths a minute ago, he had stated that there were approximately 12,000 woolly mammoths on the planet at the time, but only about 10,000 humans. And even
Mhm.
out of the population of 10,000 humans, only about 25% of them. So they did the math and they said that it would be about, maybe a few thousand humans at the most would actually be able to hunt these mammoths. So, like, how many mammoths would each individual human have to hunt to be able to take out that many mammoths and hunt them to extinction?
Hmm. Yeah, that's the other thing too, because one of the things that gets brought up a lot is they like to say that ancient creatures and ancient species, for the most part, ended up being slowly wiped out by the expansion of and growth of human civilization
Yeah, he mentioned that as well.
from hunting and things of that nature. But you don't see a lot of evidence for an explosion of human population until after a lot of these other creatures were in decline. And a lot of that is from environmental factors that are pretty sudden, that we don't yet understand. And a lot of it could be due to, like, this comet that supposedly fell. Um, According to the carvings, they believed that the comet.
Like, all that radiation damage must have been, pretty bad.
Mhm. They believe that the comet broke apart, that it was a swarm of comet fragments, because comets aren't as stable as
Yeah,
asteroids and meteorites are. They're held together by ice and dust and
just
various things.
barely pieced together.
Um, but we know from various simulations and various bits of history that even a small meteor can cause untold amounts of damage if it hits the Earth at the right
Yeah, I
speed.
heard
That's kinetic strikes.
even something as small as like a pin, like a needle.
Yeah, can cause a pretty widespread amount of devastation just
Yeah,
because of the fact of
the
how fast it's
velocity.
going and things. If it manages to get through our atmosphere without burning up,
Yeah.
it's going to cause some damage. That's why everybody's worried about the big asteroids, like the big
Oumuamua.
mile-long ones, like that, and Apophis, and things of those. But it's
Yeah.
really the medium to small ones that you have to worry about, because you can't see those coming. You could see the big
Yeah.
ones, but the small ones, they like the Tunguska event that exploded
Oh, that's one of the
overhead.
ones he mentioned, yeah.
Mhm. It wasn't a very big meteorite, but it caused a ton of damage. And so if you have a swarm of comet pieces that just spread out over a wide area as it comes into the atmosphere, each one of those pieces hitting someplace, that's a lot of
Massive
devastation.
damage.
That's a lot of devastation. And it supposedly caused the mini ice age that lasted over 1,200 years, wiping out a good number. Um, and while I'm not particularly of that bent, James, I can't particularly discount anything like that. So it's an interesting theory.
They did,
As you know, and as everybody else knows, we
yeah.
try not to be dismissive of anybody's faith outlooks on the show.
To put, some pop culture into it, uh, as everyone is probably aware by this point, my favorite TV show is Supernatural. And as James mentioned about, Lucifer and his angels being cast down to earth, they actually did their own little interpretation of that on Supernatural. And I'll just leave it at that.
And there's a lot of ways that you can look at that too. If you're an ancient an ancient astronaut theorist. You could also say that something like that was steered into the atmosphere by another species to make the planet more habitable for a more humanoid species. If you're a believer in the lizard people, which I'm not, but if you are, I'm not going to judge anybody particularly. I'm not, but if you believe that, then it would definitely make the planet after a certain amount of time would have made it warmer. And if you're a lizard person, then you want the planet to be warmer rather than colder. But I think it just adds a bit more evidence to Graham's theories that there could very well have been something here previously than what we know about, because it's something that devastating. It's going to make another ice age, and we know that glaciers can basically flatten miles and miles and miles and miles of landscape. They can destroy basically any trace of anything across whole countries. And if a mini ice age happens, you're going to get glaciers of a sort. And
True.
so they're going to wipe out possibly all sorts of evidence of a previous civilization that might have been here. All the buildings, all the canals, all the whatever that they might have built if they were advanced to a certain point. A glacier rolling through was just going to take out all of that completely and carry it who knows where.
Like
You
the
might
big,
find pieces of it in a whole entirely different region.
like the big tsunamis that are in Japan right now because of the earthquake. That is a side effect of some severe weather.
There's a lot of tectonic plate movement under that region of the world that causes a lot of underwater earthquakes, and because of that, they deal with. I feel like they've dealt with more tsunamis in my lifetime than I've heard of previously.
Yeah, like
When I was
it's crazy to see what happens over there.
when I was a kid, I didn't hear much about tsunamis. I heard of them as a thing. I studied them, that they existed,
Yeah.
and that island nations had to be prepared for it. But the first time that I ever knew of a major tsunami event was the one that devastated um, the I think it was in the Indian Ocean or something like that. It had a really devastating effect. It was so devastating that when we talked about it on the show, that it actually caused the planet to wobble. And the effects of that are still long term, still unknown. We
Oh,
don't
wow.
know what's going to happen from that. It caused us to have an extra wobble in our axis.
Oh,
And
is
it
that when the
was,
land masses started to move a little bit?
yeah, because the earthquakes were so devastating that something just shifted.
Yep, I brought it back to Antarctica.
And they said at the time the long term effects are almost impossible to predict. And now you're seeing um, increased hurricane seasons. You're seeing different weather patterns. You're seeing more wildfires in California and in different places. And some of that has been set. Like, I remember the Australia ones a few years back. People were saying it's climate change, it's climate change, it's climate change, but it ended up being set by some jerk out in the outback. And
Is it
so it was
possible
tend
it
to be
could?
man-made. But there
Is it?
are other
Go ahead.
significant like situations like that are occurring because the weather patterns and the climate is changing. And the easiest, the most obvious thing people like to say about it is it's because of us and pollution and whatever. But I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I think it
Yeah.
definitely has a lot to do with things like the tsunamis and the earthquakes
Like, what
that
about
caused
the
that wobble.
undulating clouds?
Tell everybody about that, because
Yeah.
I didn't get into that as much, but
Okay. So,
that was fresh for you, so
yeah,
go ahead.
I didn't really figure out what caused it exactly. I couldn't figure out what exactly the cause was behind it, but it's official. They have officially, for the first time, and I think the video I watched said it was the first time in 16 years that they've actually added a new variation to the types of clouds that we have in terms of, like stratus, cumulus, all that, all the different types of clouds. They recently added a new one called undulating clouds, where the clouds literally look like waves in the ocean, like they move around like waves in the ocean, and it's just weird to look at. And they literally had to come up with a whole new name for it because it became so common.
All right, James. Hey, good to have you here. If you got things to do, by all means, like that's definitely something that's that you got to take care of. You got to get your rest.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for coming
we'll
to hang
see you.
out while you did. We really appreciate it.
And that's interesting because I hadn't heard about that. So I'm glad you brought that to my attention because I've been kind of disconnected from certain parts of the news cycle because everything right now is dominated with politics and the Olympics and
And
different
also,
things.
a word of advice: if anyone wants to go research just strange weather in general, I have been trying to look weird weather and strange weather with no luck. You got to search for weather anomalies. That's the key word.
Yeah, language is becoming an important, I don't want to say a tool, but almost an important way to keep
Asset
things from people because search engines,
optimized.
especially with the AI, have
Oh
been
no, not the
weighted.
AI telling people to glue their cheese to their pizza.
They've been weighted towards certain phrases and things more than others, which is
Yeah.
why I always tell people don't just go to Google and look up something on Google
And even if
because
you are going to use Google, like try multiple different ways of wording your search.
and try multiple search engines. Always
Yeah.
look like for more than one source of information because Google classically and even more so now
Hide
is
stuff.
weighted towards finding the answers that are most popular.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the most correct, but the most accepted, which is a big deal. I don't know if we'll have to worry about that for too much longer. It's hard to say. Google just got busted in the biggest antitrust case in a
Yeah, I
long
heard about that.
time. They're fighting it. They're appealing. So who knows? Their excuse is, well, we have the best search engine, so of course we're going to have a monopoly on everything. And I'm kind of like, no, I think you suck. But
Whoa. What was that? Did you hear that too?
no, I didn't have anything.
Oh, whoa. As soon as you said that, I just heard a big, massive spike of audio distortion.
Google doesn't like the fact that I
Yeah,
said that they suck,
they
so
didn't
they're
like
like
it.
listening in. Maybe they're part of the Streamyard infrastructure. I know they're in my phone. Android is all
Like it was
Google.
loud too, like it was like a jump scare.
I'll have to go back and see if that shows up in the recording
Yeah,
after the fact.
that was crazy.
But it's funny because I don't ever use Google. I always use Microsoft's, which again people
Yeah.
are like, oh well, Microsoft is also evil, and yeah, they got
I
their
mean, you saw
problems
the
as
new
well.
version of Windows. They backed out of
Yeah,
that one real quick.
yeah. But Bing, for the most part, until recently, had found me better results most of the time. Now it's
Yeah.
they're both pretty much useless
I've
because
been
I search
using
for things and can't
DuckDuckGo
find them,
myself.
which is disconnected from any of the major corporations. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be the last open
That's what I like
source
about it.
search engine you can find. But if the other guys are withholding things and keeping them from each other, then it's
They
hard for
probably all
another
are.
one to come in and. But that's a side discussion. That's a
Yeah.
side discussion. It's just interesting how a lot of times as you are going through these things and you're looking at these things and you have people like Graham come up and say, this is what I think happened. And everybody's quick to say, oh, yeah, well, he's not a real scientist. He's this and that. And then you have something like this from Popular Archaeology come out and say, oh, well, yeah, there was a comet and it's on ancient civilizations. And but that's not really important. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny how that works out, how they're like, oh yeah, well he might have been right about that, but it doesn't mean there wasn't any early civilizations. It just means that this thing happened.
Just trying to downplay it so nobody will pay attention.
But the more you kind of look at it, it does kind of make sense. If something like that occurred and caused a miniature ice age, and then you have the glaciers. I hadn't thought about it actually until now that I've brought it up on the show that the glaciers could very well have been the cause for the erasure of most traces of ancient civilizations before that. I hadn't actually considered that until now. So now I'm giving myself new information and new
Nice.
ideas just by talking it out.
Actually, speaking of the glaciers, you reminded me of something else I discovered when I was just looking up weird weather anomalies. Is apparently there are these rocks in deserts at sometimes that will, like, the deserts will flood sometimes, and these rocks will move against the current upstream, and they don't know how it happens.
There's a few theories about it. Some ideas are that they have some kind of element that's magnetic or potentially anti-magnetic, and it works with or against the magnetic field.
Oh wow, that's
Because
pretty
then
interesting.
you get stones in places like certain deserts where the stones will travel
Yeah, that's what I
across
was
the
talking
desert.
about.
You can't really see them do it because it's so slow, but they actually, and it's not just them being because the ground is moving, it's because the rock itself is being pulled along somehow, and it has something to do with potentially the magnetic field, but it's not a strong enough effect that they have because there's an element. There's magnetite, which is a type of
Yeah.
rock,
Okay.
mineral, and so that's highly magnetic. It's where we get a lot of our magnets from, to be honest. Magnetite
Ah,
is a direct
like the
source for that kind of
Pokemon.
thing. Right. But these rocks don't read strong enough concentrations of that, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have traces in there. There's something in there that's reacting with the magnetic
Yeah,
field and causing it because they'll travel like super straight lines. You can watch as long as like wind doesn't kick up and blow away the sand lines,
you can
you
see the
can
lines.
see, yeah, like a snake has just kind of
Yeah, that's
wriggled its way
what it looked
through.
like in the video I was watching. The
And
fire tornadoes were always fun too. You talked about
yeah,
those on the last episode.
that was a thing that people weren't sure actually exists, and then they've been seen more than they
Yeah.
used to be. Um, we had water spouts come off the lake, off of Lake Erie, north of here yesterday. I believe some of the reports were up by Cleveland, Ohio. They had a lot of heavy storms up there, potentially some tornadoes and things, but they had water spouts that came ashore, which is
Oh,
interesting.
that doesn't sound good.
Yeah, that's always a fun time. I don't think that things were too terrible. I hadn't heard of any major damages, but I mean, you never really know.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a lot. The point of that is there's a lot about the climate and about weather that we don't know, that we have to
Ball
guess at.
lightning.
We still don't know. Like we have good theory on why that is what it is. That and the St. Elmo's fire. There's good like, oh yeah, we this is pretty much what we figure. But there's no definitive this is exactly what it is. It's all just a guess that's
Like
stuck
when it
because it's
rained
the only thing that
fish.
works.
When it rained fish. Don't forget about raining fish.
Yeah. And there's been other things. There's been times when things like there was something recently within the last year or so where the sky just started raining bird parts. Just like
Oh yeah, I saw
parts.
that.
And they thought, oh well there must have been a plane overhead and a
Or
bunch
a
of
bird
birds
of
went in.
prey. I heard a
But there
theory it
was
might
no
have been.
planes in the
Yeah,
area. Like they checked all the various radar stuff. They checked everything. There'd been no planes in the area. They'd been like, and it was huge amounts. It was like,
like hundreds.
yeah.
I
So
saw a
it's just
video and someone commented and made a joke. They're just like, "Oh, that's just when I spawned all 64 of my ravens at once."
so. I think a lot of this stuff is tied together. Um, I think the climate changing over time. I'm fairly sure that the planet goes through cycles of climate change. Um, on one hand, naturally on its own, and on the other hand, I think spurred on by things that hit us from outer space because things hit us pretty often. I mean,
Geomagnetic storms.
those kind of things. We just had that big round of solar storms
Yep.
from the sun that they were supposed to cause a lot of devastation, and they ended up not doing a whole lot, to be honest. I think we lucked out. Like they were
Yeah.
predicting
It
a
was
lot
good.
of
They were saying it was going to
outages.
be a lot worse than it was.
Yeah, There
Like I
were
heard
supposed to be,
predictions it was going to be out, like all the internet would be out for like 6 months.
and we'd lose our we'd get the effect of EMPs and things, and the
Yeah.
power grids would all go down, and really not much happened, if anything.
I think it went down for like maybe a day.
Yeah, we had some issues. Like there were satellite problems. We had satellites
Yeah.
go bad, and that impacted cell service. And I think a couple other things happened. But the number of satellites that have been pumped into space over the last 10 years to cover for cell service and things, I think the impact ended up being negligible long term.
Oh, are we going to talk about that? About all the debris in outer space that's eventually going to
Well,
come crashing down and destroy us all?
that's the next thing, because they're coming up now. The last year or so, at least, probably longer, but the last year or so, I remember seeing news articles about how they're trying to come up with plans for how to deal with all the space junk that's accumulating, because it is getting pretty
Yeah.
thick up there.
Wall-E IRL.
It's one of my favorite Disney movies,
Yep.
actually, because it's not one of like the standard ones.
And it was so realistic. Like I think Rob was talking about it on one of our previous episodes recently, actually, is how Wall-E is so realistic because like we've come so close to that becoming reality. All we need is a few more motorized scooters advancements and we'll be there. We've already got the VR. We don't want to be in our reality. We all sit around on our phones and TV all day. I'm guilty of it too, you know?
And we've got the big superstores, like the big Walmart things,
And all the trash everywhere.
The big miles of plastic that's
Yep.
in the ocean that collects into those artificial islands of plastic junk. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on right now, and I think the satellite thing is definitely something we're going to have to worry about more than meteorites, because again, as we mentioned earlier, just a tiny piece of rock from space can cause massive amounts of damage here. So just think about like slivers, shavings of satellite bits and pieces and all other kind of stuff.
Not good. Not
over
good.
a prolonged period of time, just like boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff up there. We keep putting more up there because we got Starlink going up there now.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. Some people were actually seeing that as a weather anomaly, and they thought there was like a chain of stars just gliding through the sky or something, and then they found out it was Starlink.
Because we're putting them up, and we don't know exactly like how all of that, the mass of everything, will impact patterns here. Because we've got the magnetosphere, we've got our regular atmosphere, we've got a certain amount of light we have to take in from the sun, and the more stuff you put out there, you got to think too.
Now that you mention it, it sounds like we're blocking our signal.
It could be. There could be a lot of things going on, and there's no good way to predict that. We can have a lot of smart people go through all the calculations, but until you see what happens, you have no real world knowledge of what's going to happen until it happens.
Yeah. Like it could, you never know what's going to happen. The world could end tomorrow. There's no way to know.
Now, I'll be honest, my throat's not in great shape, so I'm kind of done talking for the most part. But I'm gonna see if there's anything else that you want to add to the topic, and then we're probably gonna cut it early.
All right.
Because without having all three of us here, there's less.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna mention recently for the last few weeks, not like every single night, but like sometimes I'll be walking down the street at night and I'll think I see flashes of lightning in the sky, and I'm like, but it's not thunderstorming. What's going on with that? So I actually looked into it, and apparently it is a known phenomenon, I guess. And what they do is it's called. Some people call it heat lightning, but that's not relevant. It's not heat lightning. What I looked up told me that it actually is lightning from a thunderstorm, but it's more than 15 miles away because 15 miles is the sound barrier. So they say that it's more than 15 miles away because I can see the lightning, but I can't hear the thunder. So they say there actually is a thunderstorm further away. And then another thing I wanted to bring up was recently I'm obsessed with Antarctica, and I found another thing about it recently. About 3 months ago, when they did the whole CERN thing again, apparently there was a weather phenomenon on a website called Ventu Sky, VENTU Sky, SKY, and there was a weather anomaly that was a giant mass, like 63 miles high. They said it was the size of Texas. They said it was approximately the size of Texas, that just appeared as if it shot up out of Antarctica, and it appeared a little bit above Antarctica. And the first 2 days it grew, and by the third day it had completely disappeared off the radar, like they were trying to hide it. But I was watching a video earlier where they went on Google Earth and they started looking around, and they found out where the landmass, well, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. They found out where the mass had been located, and they actually discovered an unmarked, unknown island on Google Earth that had not been discovered before. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, apparently a whole entire island just like separated from Antarctica and floated out into the ocean recently.
Now that is super interesting, because then you have to wonder, was that part of the glacial shelf? Is it all just made of ice, or
Yeah.
is it actually
Like
rock? And
I actually did see a conspiracy theory where some people suggested that it might be some sort of research center.
like a mobile,
Yeah.
not like a submersible almost,
Yeah.
but
Like something hidden, because we can
mm,
see the ice on top, but we can't actually get into the actual landmass itself, because we're just using Google Earth. Like we haven't got people there.
mhm. Now that is also interesting. And to kind of circle back around so we can wrap up a little bit,
Yeah.
getting back to the popular archaeology article, one of the key parts of this is that finding that calendar, it uses the phrase appears to confirm that ancient people were able to record dates using precession, which is the wobble in Earth's axis, at least 10,000 years before the phenomenon was documented in ancient Greece in 150 BC. So, again, it just goes to show that I think there's something in the distant past
That we
that there are.
lost, like we lost
Yeah,
the knowledge of to time.
we definitely lost a chunk of planetary history, if not our own species history, or if there was a previous species
Yeah.
similar to us beforehand. Um,
Like
so
back
that's
in
something.
Egypt when they built the pyramids. We still don't know factually, for sure how they did that.
Now I'm going to let me
Feed
see
Garfield some
here.
lasagna.
I'm going to see if I can, without messing up the feed here, if I can
Okay.
pop over and get the link on
Uh,
Messenger.
All right.
My camera probably just froze up there,
Yeah,
didn't
it
it?
did for a second.
All right. Well, I'm going to pop out for a minute
All right.
so that I can find this. So entertain the people for
All
just a
right.
minute, and then I should be right back.
All right. So while he's doing that, I would like to bring back our pop culture section that we don't seem to do on a regular basis anymore. So for pop culture, I would like to mention Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs for some weird weather. We use that as a classic children's movie, but it's kind of strange when you think about it, because we always thought, oh, it's pure fiction, couldn't possibly happen. And then we hear these stories about it's raining fish from the sky, or it's raining blood from the sky, just because there was some extra chemicals in the water that was raining. And now we'll see what Spider had to tell us.
I
Here
don't
it
know
is.
why it switched that link over to like
Oh, wow.
two different posts. But if you see what the article is called, it's called Carvings at Ancient Monument, maybe World's Oldest Calendar. If you go to Popular Archaeology and you look that up
Okay.
in a search bar, hopefully, I know we talked about search engines and how they're kind of
Yeah.
crappy right now, but if you look that up, you should be able to find it without having to check
Manually
the link
type
there.
everything.
But that the original children's book, that's actually was one of my favorite books as a kid.
Yes.
The movie is nowhere like the book.
Oh, not
The
as
movie
good.
is nothing at all like the
Nah.
book, because the book's all just like, oh, this stuff randomly happens here, and then
Yeah.
the weather got weird and we had to leave. But the movie
Yeah.
all made it scientific
Oh yeah.
experiments, and then the
Okay,
second
look,
one
I
made the
did like
food
the monkey
alive.
though. I did like the monkey though.
So it was kind of weird. But
Yeah. I won't argue.
yeah, there's the article, and like I said, you folks will have to just do a search on it because the link got weird there. And
Weird
if
links.
you have comments or questions or anything that you want to say about it, definitely drop it on this video after the fact. It's going to be up on YouTube.
And we have our email down here.
Send us any thoughts you might have. We'd love to talk to you about them, or to even just mention them on the air. If you'd like to remain anonymous, just let us know, and we won't use your name. And that's what we got. I know it was a short show. I'm in pretty good spirits, despite the fact that I'm having difficulty speaking.
Then we
So,
got Uncanny Alchemist over on Twitch, Rob's channel. Uncanny Spirits Club with Spider over on Spider Does Things.
Prop all of our things. Oh, and
Yep.
prop your video shows as well now.
And then this weekend, I'm going to be doing an episode about yokai, which are like typically Japanese spirits. And I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be pretty interesting because the other episodes I've been doing so far have actually been about specific yokai. So I think it'll be nice to end it with a generalization of all yokai.
And for everybody missing out, he's been getting some good views on him. People are watching. So if you're not watching yet, you I think are missing. So you should see what all the buzz and the hype is about.
Gonna get some culture from all around the world because after this next one, I'm gonna do a global one, and then we're gonna switch it up to a different culture.
Perfect. Sounds great. So, with that being said, I imagine Rob's power will be back long before next week. So I'm sure he'll be doing his streams and everything else. In the meantime, we'll see you folks a week from today, and we'll figure out what we're talking about.
Stay uncanny.